Welcome everyone to what I know is going to be a fantastic event today. Journey to Success, Challenges and Opportunities for Women in Engineering and IT. So my name is Sandra Kentish. I'm the Head of School of Chemical and Biomedical Engineering within the Melbourne School of Engineering, which of course is the host for today's event. Let me start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. At the moment, I'm sitting on Wurundjeri land, so I recognise the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, but you may be sitting on somebody else's land, and I would also acknowledge the traditional owners of those lands on which you sit. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that respect to all First Nations people whom we warmly embrace, including our students, staff, alumni, elders and collaborators. We're here today, of course, to talk to some fantastic alumni of the school and delve into the challenges and opportunities that they've experienced. Today, though, we're also being joined by our graphic recorder, Zara, to help capture our conversation. She'll be creating a live visual of our session, visual representation of our session today, which will be spotlighted throughout the event and be made available to you afterwards. And you can see the beginnings there of what Zara is going to do. So she's going to be creating this fantastic visual representation as we go through the event. But we do have four fantastic panellists with us today. And I thought rather than me introducing them, it would be better to hear from each of them as to a little bit about who they are, what they studied originally, why they chose to study engineering or IT, and a little bit about their career journey and a highlight. So I'm going to ask the four panellists to make sure that if they could turn on their videos now so we can see who they all are. I'm going to introduce them in turn. So I'm going to start with Yenyi Fu. So perhaps Yenyi, you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Yenyi, and I'm actually calling from sunny California, where I have been living for over 10 years now. I'm super excited to join this discussion. I think whatever we can do to bring some light to the challenges that women face in the workplace, in any workplace, and where we can share learnings with each other is something that we should do more of. A little bit about me. Currently, I am the COO and head of product at a travel company called Kim Kim. And what Kim Kim is really about is trying to change the way that people travel. So I have to put a plug in here. So after the pandemic, if you're looking to travel somewhere in the world, please come and check out Kim Kim. Before Kim Kim, I worked at TripAdvisor as a director of product, leading the mobile team. And looking back on my career, I feel like I've had a few sort of major turning points, and I want to talk a little bit about one of them here, which I thought might be a helpful thing for folks who are just starting their careers. So I graduated from the University of Melbourne with a Bachelor of Science and a Bachelor of Engineering. And I started working as a software engineer in the computer networking industry, working for Hewlett-Packard. So when I graduated, I had the idea in my mind that I definitely wanted to do something engineering. I didn't want to go into consulting or anything like that. I wanted to do engineering. But I think looking back, one of the things that was not really clear to me is what it meant to be doing engineering. My mind was set on, if you do engineering, you're either a software engineer or you're a hardware engineer with my degree. So I guess a lack of imagination on my part. So working for HP for about a year, opportunity came up to work with our biggest customer at the time, Cisco Systems. And the caveat there was that the person who would take on this role would need to be at the customer site, which happened to be in California. And the role will be for 6 to 9 months. So at the time, much of my team had families, so this was not really a possibility for them. But for me, it was perfect. I've heard so much about Silicon Valley. I've heard so much about the US at the time. It just seemed like an amazing opportunity for me. And it really was a life-changing opportunity, not because it led me to the US, but it really opened my eyes to the many, many roles that my engineering and science degree can open doors to. I was exposed to the sales team, who I was astonished every single person in the sales team were engineers, right? And I was exposed to the solutions engineering team, all engineers, test engineering, product managers. I just couldn't believe that there were so many different users with different doors that my engineering degree opened. So I really enjoyed my 9 months in the US, and it was just the perfect combination of what I call product, which is figuring out what the customer needs from us, sales, convincing people that this is the right solution for them, and then leveraging all my technical skills, coding, or sometimes just even talking the same language as the customer was a amazing benefit. So at the end of my 9 months, I decided to stay in the US as a solutions engineer. And that was really the entry to finding my current role, my current product role. So I guess I will just summarize here that for me, early in your career, I think it's definitely worthwhile to just explore the different opportunities out there. And sometimes these opportunities can be life-changing.
Thanks, Yanyi, and I certainly agree with you. There's a huge range of opportunities out there for engineers or people who've studied engineering. I'm going to turn now to Sarah Morgan, who's had quite a different career, so she can tell us a little bit about her own pathway.
Thanks, Sandra. Yeah, I've had a completely different career. I actually finished school and I love the creative arts and I love maths, so I thought I wanted to become an industrial designer. But everyone told me that I'd be a much better designer if I had an engineering degree. So I got a mechanical and manufacturing engineering degree from Melbourne Uni, which was a fabulous experience. But after that, I really needed to felt like I needed to explore the world, and actually went overseas and embraced the art scene in London, which was quite an indulgence and quite different, obviously, to engineering. When I came home, I was wondering what I would do, and I got into finance and loved it. And I ended up doing an MBA from the Melbourne Business School. And I actually spent the next 20 years in finance. And it was a fascinating time. I got to work with a huge range of different types of companies in lots of different industries. And it was interesting, even though I was in finance and my role would have been as a finance role, I did a lot of work in the resources sector, the manufacturing sector, and to be able to have that technology background and the technology skills and understanding was extremely helpful, and certainly set me apart from some of the other people that might have been on the team. About 5 years ago, I moved on. I'm now a professional company director. I sit on a range of different boards. Interestingly, most of them are technology companies, which I actually love. They're agile, fast-growing businesses with very entrepreneurial people involved in them, and it's a very exciting environment to be in. And again, I'm still drawing upon those sort of technical skills that I learned all the way back at engineering. You're thinking about career highlights. I've obviously I'm older, so I've got an awful lot. Most of them probably revolve around some of the people I've had the opportunity to work with. One highlight was being able to work with Cochlear when they listed on the Australian Stock Exchange an awfully long time ago, which again, Melbourne technology that's done exceptionally well. And I got to go on the US roadshow with the CEO at that time, which was Catherine Livingston, who are very important in Australia now. Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. You were just fading a little bit out there at the moment, but hopefully everybody managed to catch what you were talking about. And I think, again, it's really exciting to see, again, that breadth of the depth of which engineers can go, and particularly their prevalence in that sort of board level area. I'm going to turn now to Elise, who's our youngest panellist, who'll tell us a little bit about her career journey.
Thanks, Sandra. So I'm the founder and CEO of a medical technology company called Select, and I'm still very early on in my career. So I studied a Bachelor of Science and a Master's of Engineering at the University of Melbourne. And it was actually through my final year project in my master's degree that the idea behind Select was born, which is quite exciting for me. And basically from graduating uni, one of my professors at the time encouraged me to apply for a medical technology startup competition, which ultimately led us to winning the grand prize. And so we kind of got funding initially out the bat and decided let's give it a crack and start a business. And so that was 2017. And so now it's nearly 3-4 years later. And it's been such an exciting journey going from a student to growing with the business as it grows and developing my skills from a very engineering and technical focused to now building up my business awareness and having to go on that journey. I think some of the more exciting things or highlights of my career is probably getting a patent published. For any technology people, that's obviously the epitome of, having a patent to your name is super exciting. And I think that was one of the highlights for me. But it's also, raising money and the people I've met along the way and the support that I've kind of gained from the community has been really exciting to be a part of.
That's fantastic, Elise, sorry. And I do certainly agree with you that getting a patent's pretty exciting. I've tried and failed a few times. So it's certainly something that's a real achievement and a credit to you. I'll now move to Doreen, who some of you on this presentation probably was taught by Doreen, but I'll let her introduce herself.
Oh, thank you, Sandra. Well, I'm an academic and have had a wonderful long career at the University of Melbourne, teaching mathematics to engineering students. I grew up in South Africa and then went to Oxford to do my PhD. And there I met my husband, and he got offered a job here in Melbourne. He wasn't going to go and live in South Africa, where there were lots of problems at that time. And so we came out to Australia in 1977. And I tutored mathematics to engineering students, and then went on to become a lecturer. And I always loved teaching. It was something that I'd always wanted to do, and I loved meeting my students and working with thousands of different math students, engineering math students. I was surprised one day when I was asked whether I'd like to take on the role of Deputy Head of Electrical and Electronic Engineering, being a mathematician and not an engineer. And I took on that role, enjoyed working with people, and then went on to being head of the department. And a few years later, left that position and was invited to become head of mechanical engineering. There I was the only woman on the staff, and Sarah was probably one of our few women students, but it was great fun going from people who were really interested in computers, electrical engineering, to those who are interested in all sorts of other things in mechanical engineering, fluids and engines and combustion, and I learned a whole lot about engineering. Probably the highlight of my career was that I went on to take a very abstract mathematical problem into the real world. And I applied my work on network design to designing underground mines. And who would have thought that I've been down some of the deepest mines in the world, and our research was sponsored by all the big mining companies, Rio Tinto, BHP Billiton, some smaller companies. And finally, we spun off a company to develop our software, to commercialize our software, where we designed the networks of tunnels in these underground mines. And that was something that provided huge savings and efficiencies for the mining companies. Our small spin-off company was acquired by a large global software company, and now our software is being used in the deepest underground mines in the world. So that was a real highlight for me. So thank you, Sandra.
Thank you, Doreen. And again, another fascinating journey. I'm going to turn to Elise, if that's okay. You've been successful quite early on in your career, and I'd be interested in beyond the technical skills that we, of course, gave you at the University of Melbourne. What do you think was most important? And perhaps you could also touch in that discussion about how important mentorship has been to you in achieving that early success.
Yeah, I think some of the things that have been important to me is, firstly, not fearing failure. I think often people think if you fail at something, you yourself are a failure. Where I kind of look at failure as an opportunity to learn, to grow, and it's part of that success as you move through. And so I think it's, tackling problems head on and not being afraid of, all the possible negative outcomes that can come. I think the second is really perseverance. Being in the startup world, we have very high highs, the awards and all of that. But there are also moments where it's the quite low lows and you really stuck and unsure where to go. And I think being able to push through that, but then it also goes around bringing that support and that mentorship around you to support you through those challenges is really important. And I'm really lucky to have a lot of mentors who guide me when I get stuck, or, just have a conversation or bounce ideas off and help me figure out what direction to go. And I think it's really important to build that community around you. And I'm grateful for the university and what they do around that and help me. I'm still in contact with many of my professors, but it's also the people in industry that have helped me along the way as well.
Thank you, Elise. And perhaps if I could turn to Doreen. I know, Doreen, in our discussions before this event, you've also indicated that mentors are important. Where do you find support and inspiration?
I think support and inspiration comes from all sorts of different places, and sometimes unexpectedly. Way back when I was in my honours year at university, a lecturer said to me, Doreen, if you work really hard, you might be able to get a scholarship and go to Oxford. Now, my father had left school at about 15, I think, and my mum had done social work at a university, but it was something quite beyond my dreams, and it gave me an absolute goal. So that inspiration to have this and motivation to work was truly wonderful for me, Sandra. I think support is very important for all people in their careers. I think we have to look around for support and seek it. And certainly when I was asked to be head of department the first time, I made sure I went to each of the separate professors and said, I'm a mathematician, I'm not an engineer, you have that knowledge, I need your support to do this role. So I urge everybody, when you want to move forward, you want your decisions to be taken up, you need to get support and go and ask for it. And if some people won't support you, and certainly I've had times when I haven't been supported, and so that door's closed, go and look somewhere else, and you'll probably find better support from somewhere, and sometimes where you least expect it. I think support's truly important in your careers. You can't do things on your own. Mostly we have others around us, teams working with us.
Thank you, Doreen, and I certainly agree with what you're saying there. I'm going to turn now to Sarah. Sarah, I know myself that there's always a temptation to say yes too often, and I think it's one of the important skills we all need to learn in our career is when to say no. Can you talk a little bit about when you've deliberately chosen not to take an opportunity and why that's important?
Yeah, look, I think it is important because you need to assess why you're doing things. And I think getting to that why is really important. I know that I use trade opportunities and when they arise, so that I can have a really clear sort of understanding going into a position, why I'm doing it and what my expectations are coming out. I think one of the most important things on that list would be cultural fit. And I've not accepted role because I didn't think that culture fit was actually there. And I mean, I think in the end, if the role can be wrong, but if the cultural fit's right, it can still be a success. But if the cultural fit's not there, it will not be a success, and it'll be painful for both parties. So I think it's really important for people to understand what's right for them, know themselves, and try and make that match and get that match right.
Yes, I certainly think that's true. I've heard that referred to as being your authentic self, and I can see there's a question already in the chat with a little bit about that if you are a woman engineer operating in a men's world, it's got to be one that you're comfortable operating in from that point of view. Let me change the topic a little bit though, and I'm going to move to Yenyi. I think also part of this being your authentic self, if you like, is understanding how to accommodate your family or your personal life, because that's pretty critical to our mental health. Can you talk a little bit about how you've balanced family and work?
Yeah, so I think the mental model I have in my mind is this is not a sprint, it is a marathon. So I have a picture of what I want to achieve both at the workplace as well as at home. But that doesn't mean I go out and sprint as fast as I can every single day, right? If I did that, you probably have an injury in a few days. So I really think of it as it's a balance. I want to have my company succeed, but I can't work 24/7. And I think that understanding gives you the space to have different pace in your workplace, right? Sometimes when you're convinced of a certain direction and you do want to put your head down and work very fast and build it as quickly as you can, but there are other times where it feels like the direction is less clear. In those cases, it's helpful to take a step back and really take some time to reflect where things stand, look at you at adjacent markets or completely different markets, talk to your customers, and give yourself the space to reflect as well. It's hard to reflect when you're just heads down plowing in a certain direction. And I think I totally echo what everyone has said so far about support. There are times where work is crazy and family life is crazy, and that happens, right? But I think it's helpful to know that that is not always the case. And it's also helpful to have support, right? Maybe one spouse can take on a little bit more at home, or you can look for help at that time. But I think just that understanding that there will be a break either at the home front or at the work front is a helpful image for me to know that I can get through this and can make it through.
And then just to follow up on that, there's been a lot of talk here, certainly in Australia, that the COVID situation has impacted women more than men because of some of these family issues. Would you like to comment on that, or perhaps if any of the other panel members want to? Go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the data's out there that COVID has definitely impacted women more so than men. More women are taking time off out of the workplace. I think for me, it has definitely impacted the business significantly, but I have also been very clear with my company and my team, hey, this is a very unusual time, and I probably won't be able to contribute as much as I would like to the business, but I think it's also important to make sure that you make the right decision for both the business as well as the family as well.
Thanks, Yenyi. And I'm going to move now to Sarah, because I know Sarah, again, in her role interfacing with a number of companies. How do you think organisations can move on beyond COVID and minimise the impact that it's had on their environment?
Thanks, Sandra. Look, I mean, COVID's obviously been tragic, but trying to find positives out of it, I think it's been quite remarkable how companies have been able to adapt in the environment. And I had one CEO say to me yesterday that he said that COVID is the largest ever experiment in remote working. And sort of that actually says a lot, that globally everyone is working from home. It's quite remarkable. So everyone's sharing in this experience. And I think what that has done is there's an acknowledgement now, certainly at the board level from what I'm seeing, that things will not go back to where they were before. This has really changed the environment. I think employers are far more confident of what working from home means. Also, this goes to flexible time. I mean, I'm hearing situations of, going back to the conversation earlier, like the father was working from 4 a.m. till 11 a.m. and then the wife would work from 12 until 6. And that was their way of actually juggling the young kids at home. And I think previously companies weren't necessarily confident about doing that, but they are now. There's the digital systems and processes and skills are out there. We're more confident about it. There's a lot of measurements around productivity and efficiency. And in fact, some teams or some skills areas are actually working far more efficiently than they were before. So there's been some real successes out of this. And I think it will have a really large impact on the work environment going forward and the way that people might want to manage their careers and get that balance between careers and work-life balance.
And just to follow up on that, you talked earlier about the real importance of cultural fit and how culture plays such a huge role. When we're working in a remote environment like we are at the moment, how do you ensure that behavioural culture is maintained?
So we're using a lot of technology systems. There's also a lot of effort that's going into different communication strategies. As I said, monitoring efficiency. A lot of work's going into mental health and just keeping sort of watches on teams and how people are working. A lot of people are saying how when they're managing their teams, they're not able to pick up some of the nuances that might be happening within that team. So everyone's, I think, just a bit more conscious of what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Yes, no, and I think that's really important that we do maintain some of those behavioural norms when we're working from home. I'm going to change the topic a little bit and turn to Yenny and Elise, who started their own business. So perhaps, Elise, if you go first, can you talk a little bit about what are the challenges of starting up your own business and how you went about that?
Yeah, of course. I think there's a lot of challenges that exist when you do start your own business. I think two of the big ones for us have been protecting our IP, being a technology business, and how you go about that, and also raising capital. In terms of raising capital, it's still pretty dismal in the investment market out there, where only 2% of women-led startups are funded in Australia. So there's a massive gap. But what I really learned going through that funding cycle or process was it's not just an investor that chooses you, you choose an investor. And so by doing our due diligence around what type of investor we want and looking at what previous investors have invested in and, you know, how they invest in women, that was how we kind of tackled that problem and helped us get investment. So I think a lot of what I've learned really when it comes to tackling problems is leveraging your network and always working on expanding your network. I felt as though every problem I've faced, there's somebody else that has faced a similar problem before. So you can always, you know, reach out and ask for advice. And then at the end of the day, you know, no one probably knows your business as well as you do. And so trusting your gut and taking that stride is really important. But there's nothing more that I think someone can do to prepare themselves for starting a business than expanding your network and really leveraging that.
Thanks, Elise. And I think some really relevant points there. Yenny, would you like to add anything about what the challenges of running your own business?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that Elise mentioned, but maybe another item that I would add to the list is kind of the internal alignment inside the company. So I think we have a vision of what we want to build. We want to make planning travel much easier. But how do you get there? What's the path that you take? That is a really hazy question, right? You can go in a million different directions. And I think one thing that I would say is super important, whether you work in a startup or you work in a large organization, is really creating that alignment between everybody, from the engineer who's going to be writing the code, to the product team, to the design team, to the CEO in the company. And I think there's many tools out there. I one of the tools that we use is something called OKR, Objective Key Result. I think I saw a question about how do you get buy-in from your management. I think that is a really helpful tool to make sure that everyone is on the same page on what is the problem that we're trying to solve in the next month, in the next quarter, in the next year. How do we know we've solved it? And if a different opportunity comes up, there's always new opportunities or different directions we can take. We can have a sort of a template to evaluate this new direction on. Is it the right trade-off that we're making? Should we be changing directions, or should we stay with our current plan? I think it's really, really important to create that alignment, because without having that alignment, it's really hard to overcome the challenges if you don't agree how to overcome them and what you need to do. So that's super important for us as well.
Thank you, Yen. And now, Sarah, there's a lot of data around on the importance of diversity in the workplace. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, and from your own position, how important is diversity to enhance the workplace, to enhance your own roles on boards, and perhaps talk a little bit more about how you got on to becoming involved in boards?
Sure. It's quite amazing the extent of the data that's around on this now. I mean, it's almost taken as a given. But I mean, some of the stats. There was one from BCG, who's one of the major consulting firms, who said that management teams with a diverse management team will have a 19% higher revenue because of innovation. Harvard Business Review. If you're going from no women in a corporate leadership team to 30%, you result in a 1% increase in net margin. I mean, in a competitive environment, I mean, everyone's got to a point where they're not ignoring these statistics now. And I think the commentary is more turning around how do you make that change, rather than questioning whether that change is actually right or not. So I think it is widely accepted, and I'm certainly seeing it in relation to the boards that I sit on. And it's not just about getting one person, one female, for example, on a board. Egon Zehnder often talk about the magic number being 3, and you can see that as that builds up, you get the conversation starts to change when one person comes on, or one female comes on. But when the second one comes on, it changes more, and then by the third person, you're having the whole dynamics of the group have changed, and the conversation is broader. You're getting different ideas. You do get better innovation and creativity in terms of coming through on ideas, which, I mean, all that ends up is improved productivity and profitability and better and transparent and resilient culture. So the benefits just sort of go on and I think sort of bounce off each other and grow. So I think it's great to see a greater acceptance of the statistics and what it means, but I think there's still some queries around how we really make that change, and there's still lots of commentary and lots of encouragement to get people to actually deliver on those changes.
No, thanks, Sarah, and I think it's really important. I want to also now talk a little bit about something called Imposter Syndrome, and I'm not sure how many of our younger people on in the audience have heard of this, but it's actually a well-known psychological pattern of behaviour. It's certainly one that I feel I experience all the time, and it's when you doubt your own skills, your own talents, your own accomplishments. You essentially feel like you're a fraud, that you're going to be exposed as being a fraud. And this is something that it's well known that women can be more impacted from. So Doreen, perhaps would you like to talk about whether you think there is such a thing as imposter syndrome, or whether there's strategies to overcome those issues?
Thank you, Sandra. Yes, I agree with you. I think that feeling of not being good enough is always there in the background. But, you know, it's about growing your confidence. I think you have to put behind you the thought that you're not good enough. After all, we've got diverse talents, and I often think that there were others who were mathematically much more brilliant than I was, but they didn't have the same leadership skills nor the management skills, and perhaps they wouldn't have got any projects done at all. So I think whenever you feel inadequate, just remember that you've been selected for whatever role you've got simply because of your talent. And after all, you have a University of Melbourne degree behind you, and that's not a small thing. That's a really great start to your career. The other thing is that you can't know everything. And I think it's absolutely fine to seek advice, to always go and ask advice, to discuss things before you make your decisions. And another thing that I was told by a psychiatrist actually is you should sit tall, you should walk straight, and that gives you that feeling, that absolute confidence in yourself. And I think then others, and just recognize that you are good, you are really good. You have a role to play in your team.
Thank you, Doreen. Again, very sound advice. I'm going to perhaps turn to Elise, who I know when we were talking about in advance of this workshop, I think you've also feel you've experienced imposter syndrome. Would you like to talk about your own experience?
Yeah, of course. I think imposter syndrome is certainly something that I've felt at various stages in my career so far. I think for me, where I most feel it is where I'm going to pitch my company and I go into an investment meeting and across from me is 5 or 6 males, an older gentleman, and you really feel out of place. And I think I've always struggled with that feeling and reminding yourself that you deserve to be here. I think the way that I always look at it is that, acknowledge the feelings, but know that you are asked to come and do this for a reason. You've got every right to be in that room. And just face that fear head on. The more you do it, the less you feel that way. I think, just reminding yourself that you deserve the opportunity just as much as everybody else. And you do know your stuff. You're there, you're prepared. If you're prepared for these things, you should be confident in your own self. But I don't think anyone should feel like they're alone when they feel that way, because I think most of us have certainly felt that way at one time or another. And as more women get to more senior leadership positions, and we see women in venture capital firms and women as more CEOs of big corporates, I think we'll see this less and less as you'll have someone that you more relate to when you're doing these sort of negotiations or discussions. So I think it will improve, but don't feel like you're alone in this.
Thanks, Elise. And I think you and Sarah have both touched on this importance of having gender equity, that if you do have more women in these positions, then they act as role models, but they also improve the diversity of the workplace. So I think we'd all like to achieve greater gender equity, and I'll ask a couple of our panellists about that in a minute. But I'm also putting a challenge out to the audience. I know it's not the normal thing to do in a webinar, but we do have 100 people online, and I'd be interested if any of them would like to post in the question and answers section themselves, not just a question, but how do you think we can go about achieving greater gender equity? Because this is something we could then potentially have as our next event. So I'll leave the audience to add a few comments into the Q&A, but I might turn to Doreen and perhaps give your thoughts on how we could collectively achieve greater gender equity.
Gender equity is so important, and I think we have to be optimistic that things are going forward. It may be much slower than we'd like, but I really believe that it's going to happen. And the way for us to do it is to work together. I often, you sometimes hear that women don't support women. I think when you have new young women coming into your team, make sure that they feel welcome. If you're asked to support other women, make sure you do. I think that's a really important for the culture of the workplace. If you're asked to put your hand up for a committee, say yes. You don't have to do it for a very long time. You take it on for a year or 2 years, whatever it is, just take the opportunity, because it just seems that we all have to continue to work. The gender equity hasn't happened yet, but it will, and it's actually up to us to really make it happen. I said yes to so many committees at the university, and actually I enjoyed them in the end. You know, you learn, you have an opportunity to have your decisions put forward, your thoughts, your culture, and I think that that's the way forward for us and for a better world, especially in engineering.
Thank you, Doreen. And I'll turn to Sarah as well to discuss this. And I'm just noting, I don't know whether Sarah can see it, there's been a post in the questions and answers a little bit about this, and making the comment that we shouldn't just be after gender equity, we should be after all sorts of diversity. Do you want to talk about how we achieve both gender equity, but perhaps more broadly addressing that comment, diversity of all sorts?
I completely agree. It's diversity of skills, ethnic, ages. It's very important, and it really, as I said earlier, it does make a difference. So I mean, I agree with Doreen. I think everyone's got a role to play in relation to making a change, and I also agree that I think I have certainly seen the environment change quite significantly over my career. And so I'm very optimistic that it will continue to change, but only if we keep pushing. And I think it needs to be a push from the top. So I make sure that whenever we're having conversations about recruitment, that we ensure that the recruitment process is open to encouraging different people and different types of people to participate in that process. Make sure that a broad range of people get nominated, and also, put names up and encourage other people to put themselves forward. But I think that's really important as well, though. It's also this making sure that, as Doreen said, that everyone takes up opportunities. And I think don't underestimate what those opportunities might be. It's amazing that things you might have done earlier in your career that was completely separate to your core career might come back and be beneficial. As you said, join committees, and it might be in a hobby or a sport, but the skills that you will learn through being on that committee could be transferred to, later in life to being on a more sort of formal for-profit board. So I think we need to tackle it from both ends, and hopefully we can continue to make a difference, because I think it's got a long way to go, but the difference is happening. And hopefully the environment and technology and systems like that will enable us to do it a bit faster as well.
Thank you. And there are some number of posts now appearing in the Q&A, which other people should be able to read at their leisure. But I think, there's some important points being there about making sure that male voices also speak on these topics is one thing I can pick out here. Obviously, there's issues around childcare, and I think we touched on that in the COVID context. So feel free to keep posting some comments there. And again, they should be visible to everybody else. But I wanted to move on now, perhaps to think about some of the pre-submitted questions. And I notice there's also questions popping up in the Q&A around really about what do you need to consider before you make a career change or a job change. The question that's live is talking about moving from into a non-engineering role and then perhaps back into a technical role. But I think there was a pre-submitted question really about what you might need to consider prior to having some sort of career change or job change. And so I might pass to Yenyi to answer that, because it's probably something that she's done most directly. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I think when you evaluate a new opportunity, for me, it's definitely, as Sarah had mentioned before, is the culture fit, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with these people in a small startup, very closely with these people for a number of years, right? So can we work together for this period of time, I think is really something that I consider quite a lot. Do we have a similar understanding on how we work together? How do we resolve differences? Those are all really, really important questions. I think the second thing is really when you consider these types of opportunities is what will I learn here, and is it the direction that I want to go, right? So if I want to learn more about managing a company, then I might want to go to a smaller company where I can really grow with this company. Is it the right learnings for me at this stage in my career? And then for me, the one of the things that I evaluate on is just, is this something that I'm excited about? There's some great opportunities, the right size company. I like the people that I might be working with. But as a product person, if I'm not super excited about this product, if I'm not dying to get to work and improve this product every single day, then this is not the right opportunity for me. So something that I also want to think about. And then one thing I do like to think about also is, I picture for myself, what is the worst possible outcome if I did take this opportunity, which sounds a bit strange, you might think. But for me, it's once I've pictured the worst that it can be, then and I can live with that result, then it's probably fine to move forward. It doesn't seem so scary that I don't know what I'm going to get into. I think I go back to my story about taking that 9-month role in California. The way I thought about it was, okay, I might hate this role, I might be really bad at it, but the worst that would happen is I come back in 6 months and I've learned something. I learned that I don't like this role, and I can live with that. So that gives me the courage to move forward as well. So that's a little bit about how I think about new opportunities or making career changes.
Thank you, Yenyi. And I'm going to move back now to talk a little bit more about this concept of cultural fit or being your authentic self. And I'm perhaps going to ask Elise. She mentioned earlier about the challenge of facing 5 men in suits when she's giving her presentations. How do you maintain that sense of being a woman and your own sort of identity in that rather male-dominated environment? It was how do you handle that?
I think for me, it's always being your true self. You never want to be somebody that you're not. Yes, when you go into the room, I'm very different to the people that I'm presenting to, and it's often it's hard to make that small talk. They're all talking about sports or whatever it is, and you can kind of feel on the outer. But being your true self, being confident in your abilities, when I go to these sort of meetings and present my technology, I know what I'm talking about, and so you need to just be confident in that and trust that they will see past. And at the end of the day, if an investor isn't going to invest based on your sex, they're not the right investor for you. And I've walked away from deals where I haven't felt like I'm getting the respect I deserve or whatever it is. And so I think it's, knowing when to stand up for yourself if you feel comfortable. But I don't think in any way you should try and be somebody that you're not, if that makes sense.
Yes, no, I agree. And there's a related question there on the post, and I think we've sort of covered it, but I'll open up if anybody else would like to comment. If you are applying for a job, how do you assess that cultural fit before you actually take the job? Are there any clues as to what you might do? I know in my own case, I'll often, when I'm mentoring people, I say it's often just almost a feel in your gut. It's whether it actually feels that these are the people that you'll be comfortable with. I'm going to throw that over to any of the panelists. Does anyone want to talk more about how you assess that cultural fit?
It's Yenny here. I feel like the interview is a place for them to get to know you, but it's also a place for you to get to know them. And I certainly think you should be asking those questions in the interview process or the meeting process. And I think it's asking pretty direct questions, right? So tell me a case where like the CEO has had a difference in opinion with someone on the team. How do you resolve that? And see if their answer is something that you like. If the answer is, well, the CEO, whatever they say goes, then that's probably not the right place for you. So whatever you are thinking about and you care about, I think you should ask, because it's also for you to vet if this is the right opportunity for you.
Sandra, I think also the world's sort of become a bit more open these days, and the research you can actually do on companies is quite extensive now. And I think it's really important to, as Yin said, to use the interview process not for them just to interview you, but you to interview them. And you can always ask to meet more people within the organisations. You're doing your due diligence, and match up what you learn out of those interviews with what they're saying on public forums. So whether it's LinkedIn or Glassdoor or other sort of social media channels, check to work and see if it all corresponds together. And you might then get a bit more comfort around, what their culture is and how that matches up with who you are and what you're actually trying to achieve.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important points. It's funny, I was actually on listening to a panel more recently on LGBTIQ message career opportunities, and they made the same point that it's important to even look at simple things like their diversity policies and see whether this is the right sort of company that's going to suit who you are, and through those formal mechanisms. There's another pre-submitted question here about what the challenges of taking maternity leave and then coming back to work following that sort of a break. And 3 of our 4 panellists have had children. So perhaps, Doreen, would you like to talk about that first?
I think that's really important, Sandra. I mean, it's just recognised women will have to take time out to have their children, and they may have a husband who's supportive of them or is able to help, but quite often there isn't. And I think you have to be sure that the workplace will give you the time you need. And in return, women work incredibly hard when they, as soon as they can, you find women are doing a little bit extra for their work, usually from home. I think women work incredibly hard, and I think that's respected. That's respected in the workplace. But be sure that you look after yourselves as women with young children, because in the long run, they're the most important asset you have, actually, your children. So look after them. I took 10 years out. I actually restarted my career at the age of 40 and then went on to all these leadership roles and head of school and so on. So it can be done, and I did work very hard, and I enjoyed it. But I do think family is ultimately so important. And I think your supervisor should give you support to come back after maternity leave, whether it's an extra person to help you catch up or perhaps they've given you some assistance while you've been away. I think all that is part of the modern workplace. That's the culture of the workplace that you need to look at.
Thank you, Doreen. And I also endorse what you're saying. I would say that I also worked part-time for 10 years myself, and I do think it's important that you don't just put your career of everything else. But this isn't about me. Does Yengi or Sarah want to also comment?
I totally echo everything Doreen has said. I think I felt super lucky. So I took, personally, 3 months off for maternity leave. That's what the US gives you. But my husband also took a similar amount of time. So even though I went back to the workforce, my husband was at home with the kids for 3 months. And I do think you should look to people around you, your spouse, for support. I don't think raising kids should be a woman's only task, right? So it is, the whole family is behind it. So I feel super supported from that perspective. And I do think you do communicate different expectations to your company and team as well. I definitely had very different hours when the kids were much younger. I would leave 4:30, 5 o'clock on the dot, just so I have a good chunk of time at home with the kids, but then be online a little bit later in the evening. So things change, and I think we have to recognize that things change. And I think if the workplace supports women coming back from maternity leave, at the end of the day, it is actually a benefit, not just for the person coming back, but for the company as well. But I think there needs to be some flexibility there.
Sarah, you want to comment on that? Otherwise, I'm going to throw you another challenge.
I agree with both of them. I've had 3 maternity leaves. I've got 3 children. Same thing, incredibly supportive partner. which certainly helped. Had to be incredibly sort of flexible over that time in terms of work times, and that doesn't change, I don't think. I've still got the kids at home, but they're obviously much older. One challenge I sort of think back to was my first maternity leave. For me, it was the most incredible experience having my first child, and so I was coming back to work. They weren't doing anything different, but I'd been through this life-changing experience. So it was almost me that needed to calibrate that, in fact, nothing was different. They didn't treat me any differently, but I saw myself as being different, which I think was then helpful when I did my second and third maternity leave.
It's an interesting reflection. I'm going to talk a little bit about what Mark Toner's just posted in the Q&A, which is an interesting, if I can paraphrase what I think he's saying. We talked earlier about the need for cultural fit, and therefore we should go and work for people who have similar attitudes, if you like, to ourselves. But Mark's pointing out that the company actually needs that diversity, and we talked earlier about the need for diversity. So how do you grapple with that catch-22, if you like, if you're needing to change the cultural fit, if you like, to become more diverse, but that in itself is a challenge? Do you have any comments on that?
It's me.
Yeah. I'm thinking of you and your role at a more senior level. How do you change that culture so that it is more welcoming of a female or anybody, a different diverse nature?
Well, I suppose cultural fit's a pretty wide term. I mean, cultural fit could be, for example, a more entrepreneurial culture versus a more traditional culture. It could be hierarchical versus flat management structure. It could be diverse global teams versus a small niche team. There's lots of different ways of actually interpreting cultural fit. I think it doesn't matter under any of those categories. You still need diversity of personality and skills and thought. So I don't see them. Maybe I see them as being different things, or maybe I see them being the same thing. I don't know if I've answered that properly, but I agree. Cultural fit. All organisations need diversity. In my mind, but the cultural fit is more around maybe the way they articulate and their values, and they go about implementing their strategy.
Thanks, Sarah. It was a difficult question to throw at you. We've got about 1 minute left for final reflections, so I'll very quickly go through all our speakers if they want to add one more comment. So, Yenyi, would you like to add anything else?
No, I think at the end of the day, I think you really have to be true to yourself, and I think have confidence that you are great at what you do. And if the current role is not allowing you to shine, then find a place that really allows you to shine. I think that's kind of the theme I take away.
Mm-hmm. Doreen?
I think it's very important to say yes to opportunities. So I think opportunities as offers of perhaps slightly different careers is absolutely a great thing to say yes to. I think you can only grow, and if something doesn't work, as Yenyi said, it's only for 6 months or whatever it is, you can move on to something else. But I think saying yes to opportunities is very important in life.
Thank you, Doreen. Elise?
My final advice really would be to leverage your network. There's so many amazing people and women mentors that can help you. It's certainly something I've done, and I also mentor other young girls, so it's definitely something to leverage. And I think also we should just be encouraging young girls in particular to take up science and technology, math subjects at school, because that's going to be critical to see change in the future.
Thanks, Elise. And the last word from Sarah.
I'll probably just reiterate what everyone else has said. Have the courage to go out and be engaged and follow your passions. And I think you'll be amazed at where it might lead you.
Thanks, Sarah. And that hasn't left a lot of time, but I did want to acknowledge also Zara. Perhaps we could just bring up quickly the graphical record she's made of this event, which is is fantastic. So I understand we'll be circulating that after the event, but a really good way of reminding us about some of the fantastic discussions we've had today. And I'd like to acknowledge all the really interesting comments being put in the Q&A, and we'll also say perhaps build on some of those comments for future sessions. I did want to point out that this is the first event of the Women in Engineering and IT Alumni Network, and we are planning to run more events like this in 2021. So thank you so much for coming today. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. And so we'll be distributing that illustration, and please do not hesitate to contact with us after the event. So thank you very much, and we'll see you all again in 2021.